Hello and welcome to this session. Today's topic will be recruitment and selection from Unit 2. As usual, I'll be your tutor and we will start with a couple of opening remarks. In our last session, we defined the concept of human resource planning. And we also examined the human resource planning process and looked at the steps that we have to go through to arrive at the human resource plan. Now, we will start this session with a couple of opening remarks. We have examined the process of determining a human resource plan. This session will focus on the implementation of the HR plan, where several human resource processes and activities are involved, and among which we have the recruitment and the selection process. In the course of this presentation, we shall define the concept of recruitment and selection. We'll examine the sources of recruitment and selection. We'll also take a look at the methods that we can adopt in conducting recruitment and selection exercises, and then the outcome of recruitment and selection exercises. But first of all, let us take a look at the table of contents. As you will recall, I did mention I shall be making a few modifications to the table of contents. The table of contents for Unit 2 is on the slide, and you can see it on the screen. Now, what are the modifications I'm proposing? First of all, as you already know, I introduced the item, the human resource planning process, which we have already discussed. And as you go through Unit 2 table of contents, you will see the additions highlighted in red. For example, I've included authorization to fill positions, the criteria to be used for recruitment and selection exercises, the policies and guidelines that have to be put in place to conduct a proper recruitment and selection exercise. Then you have the stage where the candidates are shortlisted. There's a shortlisting exercise, followed by the setting up of a selection panel or assessment board to conduct the interviews. Now, let us begin with a warm-up activity. I'm sure you have been reading about recruitment and selection, maybe some of you. And so let me ask you, is there any difference between recruitment and selection? Well, if your answer is yes, then kindly list the 3 differences that you can find between recruitment and selection. And once you've done that, you can keep moving on your learning journey together with me. Now, if the answer is no, then you will have to follow the session carefully. And then at the end of the session, you may draw your own conclusions. So let us begin with the recruitment and selection process. Well, the recruitment and selection process that intervene after the human resource plan has been finalized is a very critical and essential HR function. If it is carried out properly, that is, the recruitment and selection process is carried out properly, then it impacts on the quality and the performance of human resources. Well, we can look at recruitment and selection as a combined process of sourcing, screening, and shortlisting of candidates, followed by the selection of the best candidates who have been shortlisted. Now, these two terms, that is recruitment and selection, are often used in an interchangeable manner, and that's where there may be a confusion. But they are very specific HR activities, but they are also interrelated, as we shall see. Now, let us look at the definition of recruitment to see the difference between recruitment and selection. Now, recruitment is basically a search activity to attract the best qualified candidates in sufficient number so that we can constitute a shortlist from which we can select the best candidates. Now, selection that follows the shortlist that we develop after the recruitment process is basically a choice that we make. Selection is a choice, that is a decision that we make about the best candidates who will be considered for employment. So, recruitment and selection, while being distinct, are sequentially linked. That is, selection precedes recruitment, and recruitment selection follows the recruitment process. Now, there are a number of preliminary steps that have to be carried out in case we are dealing with a new organization and new vacancies. And the standard steps that have to be taken relate to: one, the job analysis, that is determining the tasks and the responsibilities, and the technology, the resources that are required to conduct or carry out a particular job. The job design, that is how the work will be carried out. This has to be spelled out. The job description, which relates to the duties and responsibilities of the person who holds that position, and the job specification, that is the role, the attributes, the KSA, that is the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes that are required of a job holder. Now, let me remind you that in many organizations, the concept of competency analysis is also being used. Now, a competency relates to a specific knowledge, skill, or personality trait that is necessary for superior performance. So this is a refined approach to identifying candidates most appropriate for the vacancies which are available. In a sense, it means that we can use the competency analysis approach to identify talents, that is, people who have those specialized skills, knowledge, or personality traits that can enable them to produce superior performance. Now, when we look at the recruitment and selection processes, we need to adopt a systems approach so that the two processes provide us with better results rather than conducting or carrying out these processes in an isolated or fragmented manner. So, from a systems approach perspective, we have a number of stages that we have to plan before we undertake the recruitment and the selection exercise. The first stage is laying down the policies and guidelines. That is, what are the considerations you have to keep in mind? For example, no discrimination. For example, we have to ensure that we are in a position to match the pay that is prevalent in the labor market, so that when we employ people, they do not leave because the pay may look lower considered to what is prevailing in the market. So there are a number of policies and guidelines that we have to establish to guide us in the recruitment and selection process. We also have to specify the criteria, that is, what are the attributes, the characteristics that we are looking for in the candidates for the available vacancies. We also have to identify the sources. Do we attract and do we look for people from inside the organization or from external markets, that is the labor market? Then we have to organize what we call the attraction, that is, how do we recruit, that is, ensure that people in sufficient number apply for the vacancies which are available in the organization. Once we go through that stage, the next stage is the screening of applicants, the application forms or application blanks, as we call them. The information which is provided has to be screened, and if there is need for any additional information that needs to be provided by the candidate, this has to be taken care of, and then we have the shortlisting stage. Once we reach the shortlisting stage, we have gone through the recruitment stage. Then the next phase is the selection phase, where we have to conduct tests or interviews as required. And as a result of the tests and interviews, we are then in a position to make our minds as to who are the best candidates to whom the organization may make an offer of employment. So the first thing, as we said, is to lay down the policies and guidelines to guide the recruitment and selection process. Now, these policies and guidelines may relate to the organization culture. That is, what are the characteristics, the type of people we want to join our organization. We have also to look at the prevailing legislation, the economic conditions, and the social and community aspects. In certain cases, organizations are very careful to ensure that the social and community aspects, that is, there are certain realities in the social environment, the community environment. For example, there may be vulnerable groups or underprivileged groups or people who are suffering from some handicaps. And so how can the organization accommodate such concerns in their recruitment and selection process? That is, to what extent the organization can demonstrate some measure of social responsibility towards the community. The next stage is to define the criteria. That is, what are the requirements that in terms of knowledge, in terms of skills, in terms of personality attributes that candidate should possess. Now, once we have finalized the criteria, we have to ensure that we can attract a sufficient number of qualified people, suitably qualified people for the vacancy. So we have to determine from which sources we are going to attract our candidates. Then we have to define the methods. What are the methods? Generally, for selection, for recruitment and selection, we have recourse to tests and interviews. Now, as regards the criteria, there are a number of frameworks. One framework has been proposed by Munro Fraser. Now, Munro Fraser has a list of 5 considerations which can be used for the purpose of selecting candidates. Then we also have another framework proposed by Alec Rogers. It is called the 7-point plan. You can check Alec Rogers' 7-point plan on the internet or from some textbook, and you'll find that there are a number of attributes or requirements that are spelled out by Alec Rogers for the purpose of recruiting and selecting candidates. But I'm going to draw your attention to what Armstrong has proposed. He has proposed the following criteria: knowledge, skills and abilities, behavioral competencies, qualifications and training, experience, specific demands, and specific requirements. In principle, we find that these are the criteria which are generally used in recruitment and selection exercises. Now we come to a concept which is becoming popular, the competency-based approach to recruitment and selection. In this case, the organization identifies a set of characteristics, it may be knowledge, skills, or personality traits that certain individuals may possess, which will enable them to provide a superior performance in the job. So organizations would identify the competencies which are required by an organization so that the candidate can demonstrate superior performance. This approach is used mostly in organizations which are operating in a very competitive environment. Now we come to the sources of recruitment. Basically, there are two sources: the internal sources and the external source. The internal source relates to employees in the organization, and the external source relates to the external labor market. Now, how do we tap these sources? That is, what measures or what means we adopt to be able to tap these two sources. On the screen, you have a list of these tools or means that organizations may have recourse to in order to tap the two sources of recruitment and selection. You have the list: newspapers, job fairs, employment agencies, headhunters, online job boards, portals, company websites, social media, referrals, that is, employees who refer people they may know or their friends to the organization, or walk-in applicants, those who just come in and submit their applications to the organization. We also have certain opportunities that arise in the organization due to transfers, promotions, or even some retired employees may offer their services to the organization in case there are vacancies. So these are the different possibilities for tapping the two sources that we have mentioned. Now, the advertisement, the job advertisement plays a very important role, and it can be used both for internal and external sources or for both. Now, when we design a job advertisement, there are certain principles that have to be observed. For example, the content of the advertisement should contain information about the job title, the subject area, the salary rate, the nature of the position, the summary of the principal duties and responsibilities attached to that position, and essential skills, qualification, and experience that may be necessary for the candidate to possess. So the job advertisement is a very useful tool to convey to applicants what are the requirements of the organization. Now, the trend now is also to have recourse to e-recruitment and automated online selection. We know that many organizations are now integrating technology in their HR systems. So the internet or web-based recruitment and selection is also utilized by many organizations. Another approach is outsourcing, that is, the recruitment and selection exercise are outsourced, that is, they are assigned to a private organization for a fee, and they can do the recruitment and the selection and provide the organization with a list of selected candidates together with a reserve list wherever this is required. So the recruitment process is basically to attract, to screen and shortlist candidates, whereas the selection is to make a choice. Now, how do we go about making a choice? First, the organization should set up what we call an assessment board or a selection panel, and ensure that the right or qualified people are in the assessment board selection panel. We have also to decide on the size of the assessment board, the selection panel. We also have to give consideration as to whether we need an external assessor in case this is required, because for some positions we need specialized expertise. Another way of looking at the assessment board and the selection panel is to hand over the selection exercise to assessment centers. Now, assessment centers are specialized organizations with the expertise in technology to carry out both recruitment as well as the selection exercise for a fee. Now, to conduct the selection exercise, there are two tools which are utilized. One is tests, selection tests, where we normally a selection test is a process where we try to collect a sample of the criteria or the requirement laid down for the particular position. For example, we can test intelligence, ability, or personality of candidates using different types of tests. Now, we can obtain a work sample. We can request the candidate to carry out a piece of work, and upon completion of the piece of work, we can have an idea of the skills and abilities of the candidate. We can also organize work-related tests. For example, if there is a position where the job holder may have to make presentations to customers, so the test will require the candidate to make an academic presentation on a subject or on a product, and this will be used to make an assessment of the skills of the candidate. Now, the selection process can also be carried out with the help of consultants or a specialized committee or a recruitment agency, and in all these cases, the services of these bodies or people will be outsourced. That is, the organization will pay a fee for these services, and all these decisions will have to be taken by the HR people in accordance with the policy that has been agreed upon by the organization. Now, interviews are basically a communication process to ascertain the suitability of candidates on a comparative basis, because very often we have many candidates and we have to compare the potential and the merit of one candidate with respect to other candidates. So it is always carried out on a comparable basis. Now, As regards the types of interviews, there are different types of interviews. We have the biographical approach in interviewing, where we try to find more about the background, the education, the social network, or the professional experience of the candidate that we are interviewing. The behavioral structured interview is to try to know about the specific types of behaviors that the candidate is expected to demonstrate in a particular job position. And the third type of interview is what we call the structured situational based interview, where the candidate is in front of certain situations, simulated situations, certain problems where the candidate will have to demonstrate his problem solving, sense of initiative, or his decision making skills. Now, interviews can be on a one-to-one basis, or they can also be on a group basis. So it will be for the organization to decide, as a matter of policy, whether interviews have to be on a one-to-one basis or on a group basis. Now, during the interview, the panel of interviewers will assess, for example, the personal attributes, the past performance, the technical skills, the strengths and the weaknesses of the candidate, try to gain insight into the attitudes and values of the candidate, probe for inconsistencies and contradictions if these have been noted, and also provide the candidate with more information if the candidate tries to know more about the jobs and or the vacancies and the organization. Now, before an interview, there is some background work that has to be carried out for an interview to be successful. So those who will be involved with the interview process need to prepare the interview so that when the interview is being carried out, there is a proper process, there is proper coordination among the members of the panel, and so there is a need to share the responsibilities among the panel members. It's also important that while the selection process is going on, that a proper record is kept of the selection process, because there may be cases where the document will have to be produced. For example, in case there is a litigation or there is an appeal, there's a representation. So it is important that proper documentation is kept in order to explain or justify decisions which may have been made by the selection panel. Another aspect of the selection process is the recommendations that at times are required from referees. So the candidate may have to submit reports or recommendations from people who may know the candidate personally, professionally, so that the panel can make a better assessment of the candidate's attributes. Once these stages have been gone through, the next step would be the verification of qualifications and the pre-employment medical assessments, which are basically administrative requirements before the candidate is offered an employment. So the outcome of the recruitment and the selection process is a number of candidates who have been considered to be the best candidates, and they would be offered employment. Now, what happens to candidates who have not been retained? Now, in some cases, successful candidates are informed of the outcome as well as the unsuccessful candidates. I think this is a good practice to let the candidates know that the selection is over and that the organization has been able to find the most suitable candidates for the vacancies which were available. Once we have the list of selected candidates, there may be, in certain cases, certain candidates who may turn down the offer or may not turn up for the positions which have been offered. It's a good practice, therefore, to always have a reserve list from which to draw in case there are candidates who decline or do not turn up for the vacancies which are available. Now, in some cases, especially in certain areas like medicine, health, social work, education, the organization is also interested to check whether the applicants have a certain sense of community and social responsibility. So before final decisions are made, the candidates are required to undertake activities that will bring them in contact with children or vulnerable adults, or even to be confronted with certain issues or problems which have a social or community dimension, and they may have to make certain reports which can be considered as part of the recruitment and selection process. Now, once we have planned the recruitment and selection process, we have the standard procedures and standard steps. We have to go through all those procedures and steps. But it can also happen that there are certain unforeseen circumstances where we have to adjust our standards, our procedures, our steps. Whenever there are exceptional circumstances, I can give you an example. You may have advertised, an organization may have advertised for a position, and we do not find any suitably qualified candidate, but we have a candidate who is overqualified. In view of his qualification experience, the organization may consider that the candidate is overqualified. Now, usually we will fit the candidate to the vacancy which is available. That is, we look at the attributes of the candidate and we find them suitable. We will fit the candidate to the vacancy which is available. Now, in cases where we do not have the suitable candidate, we have a overqualified candidate or who has got more attributes than we are looking for, then we can fit the job to the candidate. That is, redesign the job so that we can retain and take advantage of the overqualified candidates. So these are contingency situations. Once we have completed the exercise, we may also expect that there may be appeals or representations with regard to the selection that we have carried out, and we should be prepared to address the appeals and representations. Especially, we can see that we can have such situations in the public sector. So we have to be able to document our procedures, our steps, and have evidence, arguments ready to give explanations or to rebut any appeal or representations that certain candidates may make vis-à-vis the organization. So this is the way we can address the two interrelated processes, namely recruitment and selection. As we said at the beginning, these are two processes which are very critical, and if they are well organized and carried out properly, they can impact on the quality of the human resources, the performance of the candidates, as well as on the budget. Because if we recruit and select the right candidates, we will have more chances of retaining those candidates, so that candidates do not decline the offers or do not leave the organization, which will create a problem of turnover. So I hope that we have obtained a certain number of explanations on the two processes to consolidate your learning on about recruitment and selection. You may have to read your manual. You may have to consult certain textbooks, certain articles. But before we close, let me draw your attention to a number of issues that may crop up during a recruitment and selection exercise. And I would like you to look into those issues. The first issue that may arise is a number of problems that may impact negatively on the recruitment and selection exercise. For example, when the exercise is being carried out, certain conditions have not been fulfilled. For example, in terms of the choice of the members who sit on the selection panels. It can also relate to the methods that have been adopted. For example, in certain cases, you may have to adopt a particular type of interview instead of another type of interview. So the two issues that I'm putting to you: one, what are some of the problems that can arise which can impact negatively on the recruitment and selection process? And the second issue that I would like you to look into is, what are the modern trends as far as recruitment and selection is concerned? You may think about it and try to collect as much information as you can to establish as to the emerging trends in terms of recruitment and selection. Well, we have come to the end of this presentation on recruitment and selection. I hope you have found it interesting, and so it's time for me to say goodbye until we meet for another presentation. Thank you and goodbye.